Hello, loving parents. Today I'm going to talk a little bit about how to respond with yourself when the inevitable happens. Because even if you have a deep intention to respond lovingly to your children, to manage your own emotions when they're doing something that upsets you, to set limits mindfully with awareness, and to modulate your tone and your voice and manage your words and your emotions. Even if you have a deep intention for all of this, it's inevitable that at some point you'll slip. You'll flip your lid, and words that you don't want to say will come spilling out. There will be a raised voice or a lot of tension in your face and body. And if your intention is to stay calm and manage your emotions, it can be very challenging for us when we slip, when we make oopsies. And how we respond when we make these oopsies really, really matters. I think it's one of the most essential pieces to practicing calm and empowered limit setting with our kids, is how we set limits with ourselves. It's how we respond to ourselves when we make oopsies. Pardon. So what I'd like to look at is the internal process that tends to unfold, and I've heard hundreds of moms tell me about their processes around this, and fathers also, when they make oopsies, when they yell at their kids, when they become dysregulated and say things they don't mean. What tends to happen is that a mom will feel incredibly guilty, will beat herself up, will say, I'm terrible, I'm doing everything wrong. She'll globalize, she'll overgeneralize, she'll put herself down. And this is all, when we look at it together, every time I've looked at this with a mom, it comes from a place of wanting herself to be different and trying to put herself down and punish herself so she'll change. Just as that doesn't work for our kids when we yell at them and punish them and call them names, it doesn't tend to lead to change, and all of that emotional noise gets in the way of the message. The same is true for ourselves. This thing that we do inside when we talk to ourselves, it's a relationship. It's a relationship with ourselves. So in a way, of course, it works the same out there as it does in here, inside our own minds and hearts. So Becky Bailey says, the way we discipline ourselves eventually translates into the way we discipline our children. So it all starts here. This is the most important place to work, really. If we can shift how we respond to ourselves when we make oopsies, when we lose it as a mom, it will deeply impact the way we respond when our children disobey us or insanely frustrate us. So instead of beating ourselves up, instead of yelling at ourselves, instead of putting ourselves down and calling ourselves names and punishing ourselves internally, what can we do? Well, if a child did something that we didn't appreciate, we would set a limit and we would listen and express compassion and empathy to their feelings. So I'd like to encourage us as parents to practice this way of responding to ourselves when we make oopsies. And at the end of the little talk here, I'll lead you through this exercise. But I encourage you to do this with someone. And you can always schedule a session with me when I have openings. If it's just a one-off, we can do an opening when I have a cancellation. Otherwise, we can try to work you into my regular schedule if you'd like to meet more regularly. But I really think that when we're in a cycle of self-violence, it's hard to get out of that cycle on our own. I'm hoping that this video will be enough, but if it's not enough for you, then feel free to reach out and get some extra support. So it looks like this. So limit setting would look like this. Saying to ourselves, just like we would say to a child who's hitting or kicking, I'm not going to let you do that, sweetie. We take the foot or we take the hand, I'm not going to let you kick. It's with warmth, it's with care, it's not punitive. There's no interpersonal disapproval or intrapersonal disapproval. It's calm, it's clear, it's connected. So we can say to ourselves, that kind of imagining the wise part of ourselves saying to the overwhelmed part of ourselves who's flipped their lids in the moment, I'm not going to let you yell at your kids, sweetie. I'm not going to let you yell at them. And it looks like you were really overwhelmed in that moment. It makes sense that you were overwhelmed. Tell me all about it. So just take a moment to take that in. How different that feels from the more conventional or traditional or common, you're a terrible mom. Why are you doing this to your kids? They're better off without you. You should just stop interacting with them altogether. You're ruining their lives. You're terrible. Why can't you change? You're awful. You should just leave this world. That's kind of more common verbiage that comes up within us. And just notice how that affects you as you hear it. And I was actually being very light with it. I was giving it a light touch because I don't want to overwhelm you too much. But there's often a much more disparaging tone, much more disparaging kind of face, embodiment of it. It's unhelpful. It's so unhelpful. It comes from a good place. It comes from a place of wanting us to change, of wanting us to transform, but it's unhelpful. So I'll lead you through a kind of intrapersonal journey in a little bit, but I also want to give you a couple of other tools to use in the moment. This is after the fact. This is after you've flipped your lid. It's helpful to practice compassionate limit setting with yourself, loving limits with yourself. Saying no to the behavior, but saying yes to the feelings of overwhelm and frustration with your child and all of that. Saying yes to all of that. Saying no to yelling and snapping. Containing. And it often feels so good to feel some internal containment over these aggressive impulses that we all have. They connect us all. They're human impulses. So some other tools that you can use in the moment instead of after the fact are these. So I like to just have a practice of noticing when I'm starting to get tense and tight and feeling like my fingers are getting tight, or my jaw's clenching, or my stomach gets tight, heat in my system. These are all little red flags that I'm about to lose my lid, flip my lid, or I'm on the road to flipping my lid. So that awareness practice. I like to say out loud, I'd like to do something different. I like to say out loud, I'm feeling frustrated. I make sure not to say I'm frustrated at you, because I don't want to point or blame or shame. I just own my frustration, and I think that's a really powerful practice. I actually briefly want to give you an anecdote about this, because our children are always watching us, and they're always learning from us, and we model so much to them each time we speak and regulate and manage our own emotions. So one day we were living in an area just surrounded by nature, and my son and I had made a volcano out of paper mache, and it was outside to dry. And as I was putting my son to sleep, he asked me to please remember to bring it in, and I said, of course, okay, and I rubbed his back, and then I got into bed and I forgot. And I woke up in the morning, my son said, Mom, did you bring in the volcano? And I said, oh my gosh. And we walked outside and we looked at the volcano, and sure enough, raccoons or whatever it was had destroyed much of it. And he looked so disappointed, and I said, oh, Jackson, I'm so sorry. You have every right to be mad at me. And he said, Mom, I am mad, I am frustrated, but I'm not frustrated at you. I'm just frustrated. Wow. He could own his own frustration. He was protecting me from the onslaught of his anger. That is powerful. And I really practiced modeling that to him his whole life, protecting him from my own rage, my own frustration. I made sure to not direct it at him directly. So I like to name my frustration, and MRI studies have shown, people are in the MRI and they're feeling anger or rage or frustration, and compared to moments when they don't name it, when they do name out loud frustration, when they put a label to it, there's a soothing or regulating response in the brain. Parts of the brain light up that are involved with emotional regulation. So just naming an emotional state that's overwhelming can settle us a little bit. It won't bring us all the way down to 0, but it will help us manage it a little bit better. It's powerful. Fred Rogers says, anything mentionable is manageable. So just calmly stating, I'm noticing I'm feeling frustrated. It can be helpful to let your child know, so I'm going to use some tools to calm myself down. I'm going to take a few 7, 8, 9 breaths. So Bob Stahl says stop, take a breath, observe, proceed. So the acronym STOP. S for stop, T for take a breath, O for observe. Observe yourself, your body, also observe your child and how small they are, and that they're looking up to you, and that your stature is overpowering them anyway, and how you appear in their eyes. Observe, and then proceed. But for me, taking a regular old breath never really helped, so I encourage parents to take a 7, 8, 9 breath. It just helps to bring the prefrontal cortex, the higher order thinking brain, the regulatory brain online a little bit better than just a regular old deep breath. So for this breath, you inhale for 7, you retain for 8, and you exhale for 9. So I found that very useful. And, a lot of parents get triggered in cars because you're trying to drive and then the kids are yelling or screaming or hitting each other or whatever they're doing. You ask them to stop, they don't stop. You ask them to stop again, they don't stop. And then most parents will flip their lids, in part because they're doing something else that's requiring their energy and attention. And self-regulation, self-control, studies have found, is a limited resource. We don't have infinite amounts of self-control. So if we're doing another task, it's going to be harder to regulate ourselves. So what I recommend when you're starting to feel frustrated when the kids are doing things that are annoying you or frustrating you is to pull the car over. Pull the car over, even if it's on a highway, finding the safe curb and taking a 7, 8, 9 breath, or 2 or 3. And then coming out of the car, safely if you can, to the side of the highway that there's no cars around, and saying, I'm here to help. I'm not going to let you kick and scream. Essentially, I'm going to contain this, but I'm here to help as your ally. So Susan Steifelman calls this coming alongside the child instead of at the child. So Patty Whiffler calls this bringing the limit to the child instead of throwing it across the car or across the room. Bringing the limit to the child. And just those acts of stopping the car and taking a few 7, 8, 9 breaths instead of stopping the car and automatically yelling at the kids, like stopping the car, taking a few 7, 8, 9 breaths, and then getting out of the car, opening the door calmly, coming to the side of the child, and with warmth saying, I'm here to help. I can see you're having a hard time and I'm here to help. I'm not going to let you hit each other. That is forming new neural pathways in our brains. For many of us, something that's never been done before, so we're charting new territory. I think of it like bushwhacking new neural networks. It's going to be really hard the first time. The second time, there's a little bit of a path. The third time, there's a stream flowing through that path. It's more of a flow. And from there, it mostly gets easier, but every once in a while we'll get tripped up again by some fallen tree or something. That's okay. And the important thing is to respond compassionately to ourselves. So just as we can imagine this moment in the car, we can imagine shifting things in the house or at the playground or in the parking lot. We can practice doing things differently. It all begins with that intention. I want to do this differently than was done to me. I want to do this differently than I've done before in these moments. So setting that intention, cultivating that awareness, naming what's true for us. Stop, take a breath, observe, proceed. When you take that breath, allow it to be a breath of not just a deep breath, but a 7, 8, 9 breath. Inhale for 7, retain for 8, exhale for 9. And then bring the limit to the child so we can establish a connection with the child instead of throwing it across the room in an exasperated way. And if we can't regulate ourselves, then the best thing to do is to calmly say, I'm going to take a break. I love you. I'll be back in 5 minutes. And go into the bathroom or into the bedroom. A lot of times when I encourage parents to do this, they say, I can't do that. My kid will follow me and bang on the door and it's not relaxing at all. It makes me even more mad. So yes, instead of imagining that you can do this and the child won't follow you, predict that the child will follow you and will bang their fists on the door and will scream and cry for you. It's very hard for a child when you disconnect in this way. But it's much better than shaming them, yelling at them, blaming them. It's much better. And you're also modeling self-regulation when you do this. You're modeling taking care of your own emotional state, and you'll come out more regulated. I've found that, and I've studied this very deeply in myself, when I go into my own self-timeout, usually for me it was the bathroom. When my son was very young, we only had one room and a bathroom, so it was just a bathroom, tiny little bathroom. I would have to sit on the toilet because there was really no space. There was just sink, toilet, and bathtub without any space in between. So I would sit on the closed toilet and say to myself, wow, that was really rough. So I would offer myself self-compassion, and this comes from Kristen Neff's work with self-compassion. So I would just state what happened, My son did this, and I haven't had much sleep, and I said this. This is what happened. And so I would just non-judgmentally name, with mindfulness, what happened. And I'd offer myself some care, like, yeah, it's really hard. That was a rough moment. I'd put my hand to my heart or wrap my arms around myself and hold myself in a caring way. And then the third step is to tap into common humanity. And there's millions of mothers around the world right now who are feeling this exact same way, alone in their own houses, feeling scared and overwhelmed, and not feeling good about how they just responded to their child. So including ourselves in the species of humanity is very powerful and healing. Instead of what we usually do is cast ourselves out of goodness, cast ourselves out of the Garden of Eden, so to speak. We don't belong here because we messed up, right? It's unhelpful for us. It won't regulate ourselves if we just sit there and stew in how bad our kid is or how bad we are. Either way, or sometimes both, it's not helpful. What's helpful is to practice self-compassion when we take that self-time out. It will deeply regulate ourselves. Even better, I found, than just naming my emotional state. So when we come back out of a self-timeout, we can come down to our child's level. They're probably scared and sad, and we can just be there for them. Oh, I see you're upset. That was hard for you, huh? And they might cry or whimper a little bit, and we can just hold them. Say, I'm here for you now, sweetie. Tell me all about it. And there's usually a sweet reunion. And you can take ownership. I notice I snapped and raised my voice, and I'm sorry. I didn't mean to do that, and I know it didn't feel good to you, and I'm working on changing that. A sincere apology that's not overly guilt-infested. We don't want to put our guilt all over our kids and make them see how guilty we feel for it. That's not useful. A clean, simple apology with lots of space for them to tell us how they feel. Okay, so that's the process what I recommend when we are on the road to snapping. When we can't control ourselves, we can remove ourselves. If we haven't removed ourselves and we have snapped, then looking at how we self-discipline, how we talk to ourselves. Which, the most helpful way I found is to set a loving limit and express a lot of compassionate care towards ourselves, as we would our children, as we're practicing doing with our children. So I'll invite you to close your eyes, especially if you're watching this, you might have just recently done something that you feel guilty about or sad about. So I'll invite you to close your eyes and just see if you can bring to your awareness, invite into your sphere of awareness, the part of you that was overwhelmed when you said or did something with your children that you didn't appreciate, that you think was unhelpful. And then just give this part of you a name. So for some people, they call it the overwhelmed mom, or some non-judgmental name is preferable. Some way of naming this that's not punitive or judgmental. So just take a moment to see this part of you and give it a name. I'll refer to it as the overwhelmed one. And just take a moment to notice what that overwhelmed one was needing or wanting in the moment with your child. And then see if you might bring into focus the part of you that's been learning and growing as a parent, that's been empowered by learning new tools and by setting limits in a calm, confident, connected way. And maybe taking a moment to see if you might give this part of you a name. I'll refer to it as the wise one. You can find your own name that works for you. And just take a moment with this part of you. Just seeing this part of you, noticing this part of you that has interacted with your child before. It is there within you. It's a part of you. And if you're having a hard time getting a vision of this, you might just consider the you that's listening to this video now. This wise one who's reaching out for tools and support and education. The wise one, you. Just see if there's something that you or the wise one would like to communicate to the overwhelmed one. And I will give you some words and you can take them or leave them. Something like this. Overwhelmed one, I'm here for you, and I'm not going to let you yell at the kids. I know you're having a hard time, and you can tell me all about it. So try something like that. I'm not going to let you yell at the kids. I'm here for you. Tell me all about it. Tell me all about how hard it was for you. Just take a moment and allow that to unfold inside of you. And see if you can be aware of the overwhelmed one receiving this communication. And if the overwhelmed one does receive this communication, notice how the overwhelmed one responds to it. And then just see if there's anything else that needs to be communicated or would like to be communicated between these two parts of you. If it helps you You can write down this communication between these two parts. You can say it out loud. You can tell a friend. And see if there might be some way of these two parts of you working together as a team, as allies. Notice who's initiating that connection, if it's happening within you now. And notice how it feels to be responded to when you've made a mistake, overwhelmed one. Notice how it feels to be responded to in this kind and connected way. In this way that deeply reassures you that you're loved, that you're worthy of care and connection and kindness, even when you've made a big mistake, an oopsie. Notice how that feels. And just see if there's anything else that needs to be communicated between these two parts of you. And if you have a spiritual practice or a religious practice, feel free to invite an image, a loving presence, something that can hold you and these parts of you together, to come and be there with you in this path of parenting mindfully. Some people don't have a kind of set spiritual practice or religious practice, but they love the feeling of being in nature. So maybe some aspect of nature that can hold you in this. Just take a moment with that. It's okay if nothing comes. Just see if there's some image of a holding environment or a loving presence. And we're going to be bringing this to a close for now. But just take a moment to know that this relationship between you and higher self, higher power, the wise one and the overwhelmed one continues on within you. And this relationship between the wise one and the overwhelmed one will continue on within you as well. And the more conscious contact they can make, the deeper we're bringing together the regulatory functions of the wise one to the overwhelmed parts of ourselves. So just taking a moment to thank yourself for investing this time into your own inner healing process for the benefit and good of your children. I thank you deeply for that, because I know how much it transforms not only ourselves but our families and future generations to come. Thank you.